So Seth Dillon is the head of something called the Babylon Bee. And what the Babylon Bee produce is these really hilarious fake news stories in order to satirize what's happening in the world today. Here he is saying Candace Owens... the Babylon Bee said Candace Owens horrified to learn Christmas was started by the birth of a Jew, and he's not Jewish, but he has been staunch in standing up to rising anti-Semitism on the right. And I wanted to show you his speech that he said recently at a Combat Anti-Semitism Movement event. It's a really powerful speech where he explains why he's doing what he's doing, why he's standing up to the rising figures on the right that are against the Jewish people and against Israel. Here is someone who's really got his moral head screwed on straight. And he said something at the start, which I found quite poignant. He said, "I didn't set up the Babylon Bee to satirize the left or to satirize the woke. I set it up to satirize bad ideas, wherever they come from." It's a remarkable speech. Have a watch of it, because I think he makes some really important and necessary points for the times we're in.
At some point, somebody has to be willing to take a stand, and when you do, other people will also be willing to take a stand. Now, how does all of this relate to the topic at hand? Well, the mission of the Babylon Bee, like I said, is to ridicule bad ideas. I didn't say ridicule the left. I didn't say ridicule wokeness. I said ridicule bad ideas. And bad ideas can live anywhere, can't they? They're not just in one place. There's anti-Semitism on the left for sure. Lots of it. There's now going to be more of it in New York City than we had hoped for. But it's on the right as well. It's rising on the right. It's a growing threat on the right. There is a identitarian white nationalist movement that's gaining a lot of momentum, and it has some helpers. And these bad ideas are rising almost completely unchecked. And so when I look around at the landscape and I'm like, okay, where do we need to be paying attention to these bad ideas? You know, everybody wants me focused in one place. We need to be united. We need to be united front. We have to focus on our enemies, not our friends. Wait a minute, what do you mean friends? What are you talking about, friends? White nationalists aren't my friends. You know, people who think that Jews... People who think that Jews are less than or scapegoat them for every evil that's ever happened, including all of the leftist stuff that we need to be fighting, that's all the Jews' fault. Those people aren't my friends. They're every bit as much my enemies as people on the left. And so these bad ideas need to be confronted. And I was thinking, you know, I wrote a piece recently for the Free Press about this, talking about the foolishness of no enemies to the right. It's this principle that we should be united and never attack anyone to the right of us. The left didn't want us to punch down. They always wanted us to lay off the marginalized and the oppressed. And of course, that was just ridiculous because Rachel Levine, for example, is not marginalized and oppressed. This is a white male, high-ranking government official, okay? And by the way, a white male, high-ranking government official who has the power to silence us for joking about him. That is not marginalized and oppressed. That's scary power. That's way more power than I've ever had. And so it's actually the opposite of what they say it is. So I don't think it's punching down when we hit those ideas. But the left didn't want us to punch down. The right doesn't want us to punch right. Well, the far right anyway. And why is that? Why don't they want us to punch right? And why don't they want us looking over there? And how foolish if we don't. Because, you know, bad ideas are like cancer. And when they're not treated, when they're not cut out, when they're not excised, they spread. And they do damage. They do real harm. And if we're not willing to look everywhere for them, how silly and stupid are we? I recently went in for a diagnostic scan at this place called Life Imaging. They do these CT scans of your body. And I was pretty glad that they didn't just scan the left side of my body. They could have missed something, couldn't they? Well, that's why I think the no enemies to the right principle is so foolish, is because it keeps all of our focus in one area, one place, to the exclusion of others where there may be cancer festering and metastasizing, and guess what? It is. And it needs our attention. And so we have to be willing to look everywhere for that. And so, you know, I've started to be very vocal in my opposition to some of these bad ideas that are living on the right. And one of the, you know, obviously the objections is that I'm engaging in what's called gatekeeping. Have you heard that term? Gatekeeping, it's a dirty word. It's like dispensationalism. You're not allowed to say it. Gatekeeping Yeah, gatekeeping, drawing lines. If we purport to have principles, if we purport to have values, if we purport to be protecting a movement or a cause, whether it's the Christian cause or the conservative cause or the intersection of those two and where they overlap, if we're not willing to draw lines and just invite anybody into that tent, then how does the movement even have a meaning? What are we even standing for? Inviting people into the movement that have racist ideas, misogynist ideas, collectivist ideas, post-constitutional anti-liberty ideas. These people are not conservatives. They're not part of the mainstream movement. They were always on the fringes, and we used to have when we had unity as a movement on the right, as a conservative movement, it was unified against the left, the secular progressive left and their overreach, but also unity against the alt-right, as it was called. We didn't identify with Nazis. We shunned them. We said, no, you have no place here. And we pretty successfully did both. Trump was so badly mischaracterized when he gave that there's fine people on both sides comment in Charlottesville. But they cut off the part where he said, and I'm not talking about the white nationalists and the Nazis. I'm not talking about them. They should be condemned totally. If you watch the whole clip, that's what he said. And that should be our posture, right? Does fighting the left mean that we can't say that too? Of course, we can fight both at the same time. And we should fight both at the same time. And many people were on the same page with this. I think it was a piece that was written in 2019, or maybe it was 2017. Matt Walsh wrote a scathing article for The Blaze before he went to the Daily Wire, talking about how the far right and the far left deserve each other. They're both godless. They're both violent. They're both sick. They both have bad ideology. They're equal but opposite sides of the same coin. That was his position then. His position's very different now. His position now is that we need to be united, and there's nobody to the right of me that I won't unite with to defeat the left. I think that is foolish. I think it's foolish. I think it's morally unjustifiable. And I don't think it's politically expedient, because how in the world, the idea is supposed to be that we're going to unite with people like that to win and defeat the left. First of all, how are we winning by abandoning our principles? We're not. That's what we're fighting for. But secondly, how do you win elections? How do you win elections when you're uniting with people whose message is completely unelectable? Now, there is an attempt that's being made to make the message more palatable. And I think that is almost as disgusting as the hatred and the bad message itself. We focus a lot of our attention on the hate. Anti-Semitism is hatred, right? It's bigotry. And we focus a lot of our attention on that, but we focus much less of it on what allows that hate to spread. And that is cowardice. It's an unwillingness to confront it, or even worse than that, a willingness to promote it and whitewash it. And we're seeing a lot of that as well. We saw it with the interview that Tucker Carlson just had with Nick Fuentes. This was not a confrontational interview. It was a friendly interview. It was, I'm not going to ask him about any of the terrible things he said, and he said terrible things. He glorified. Someone just put together an 8-minute long series of clips of Nick Fuentes glorifying Hitler. 8 minutes long. It's not like it slipped out one time. He's since deleted his tweet that said Team Hitler. He said he was on Team Hitler. I quote tweeted it and said Team Jesus. 8 minutes of that, Tucker didn't press him on that. He's talked about how when we gain power, talking about the Groyper movement, his white nationalist movement, when we gain power, those perfidious Jews, the atheists, the secularists, the Muslims, they need to be put to death. They need to be executed. And these are terrible things that he said. He said that, J.D. Vance, I can't even repeat what he said about J.D. Vance and his family, but he disparaged him for having brown kids. Tucker didn't ask him about that. J.D. Vance is one of his best friends. I think this is not just irresponsible. I think it's evil. And I want to understand it. I truly do. I want to understand why anyone who claims to be a Christian conservative is turning a blind eye to these things and allowing them to spread into the mainstream. We hear a lot of excuses. Oh, they're my friends. I have to be loyal to my friends. You have to be loyal to the truth. You have to be loyal to what's good and true, even if it means you might even lose some friendships. And by the way, if your friends are requiring that you stay silent because they don't want you challenging them when they're promoting evil, they are not your friends, they're holding you hostage. A lot of what I have said in opposition to this has been mischaracterized as a call for censorship, a call for deplatforming, a call for cancellation. I'm sure many of you saw the statement that was put out by the Heritage Foundation in response to the backlash that Tucker received for his Fuentes interview, and he referred to the people. It was incredible. He's since apologized, he's since backtracked on this, but initially his response was not to condemn the Nazi, really. You know, he's like, oh, well, we don't like Nick Fuentes, I don't want to see him canceled. But he didn't have much to say about Nick. He had no condemnation for Tucker for whitewashing Nick. His condemnation was for the people who objected to it. He called us a venomous coalition sowing division. The venomous coalition sowing division are the people who hate other people and are trying to launder that hatred into the mainstream and are being aided by others to do it. And we need to have, for so long, you know, it was my understanding that we had moral clarity. It was my understanding that we were on the same page when it came to what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's true, and that we're fighting against, you know, mostly the secular progressive overreach, the idea that men can become pregnant and chest feed, or the idea that a boy can be trapped in a girl's body, which is absolute nonsense. To be a girl is to have a girl's body. These are insane ideas. They needed to be, you know, pushed back on, but they became so wildly popular, and we had the moral clarity, you know, for the left was overreaching like crazy. And by the way, they led with the radicals. They gave them the reins, and how did that work out for them? They went too far, and now we're winning in response to that. Leah Thomas is the one who was swimming in the pool with Riley Gaines. I used to make a joke about how we're so disadvantaged in this fight. It's like being a woman who's just jumped in the pool with Leah Thomas. And for those who don't know, that's the tall one with the testicles. But that joke is outdated now because Leah Thomas's titles have been stripped. Those records have been taken away. We're winning in the culture. We're winning in the courts. Why in the world do we need to unify with white nationalists who hate Jews in order to keep winning? What sense does that make? We're already winning. We're already winning by defending our Christian values in the Constitution and going through constitutional means to advance our values and the truth. And so I just don't even buy into the premise at all. I reject it. And if this is what it means to be a conservative, if what it means to be a conservative is to give up our principles to win politically and to gain power, then I'm ashamed to call myself one. Thankfully, it isn't what it means. I have a lot more to say. I don't know how much more time I have, so I'm just going to give a few more remarks here before I close and we bring on this panel. But you know, I've faced a lot of backlash for this. I was getting to a point about how this has been regarded as a call for censorship and deplatforming, and it was mischaracterized by many, including the Heritage Foundation. And I think that's really wrong, and it's not helpful to the discourse because I don't have a problem with platforming. I have a problem with promotion. I think that if you're going to have somebody like Nick Fuentes on your show, you better rake him hard. You know, the combative interview that Tucker had with Ted Cruz was 10 times, maybe 100 times more aggressive than the one that he had with Nick Fuentes. What's the excuse for that? And you know, it's not that he's incapable of this. Tucker is so good at historically had been so good at being confrontational, ridiculing and refuting his opponents. He on Fox News, he would have these liberals on all the time, and he would laugh at them, and he would refute their ideas, and they would look so silly and foolish by the end of it that they wouldn't come back, and he ran out of people to have on his show. He's good at that. Why doesn't he do that with bad ideas on the right? That's an important question we need to be asking ourselves. Why aren't we doing that with the bad ideas on the right? Why aren't we treating them with the condemnation that they deserve? And it's not a call for censorship. Criticism of his handling of that interview is a contribution to the discussion, not an attempt to end it. It's a contribution to the discussion. So don't let them try to mischaracterize that and flip that on you like you're calling for, people to be completely censored and deplatformed. I actually defended Nick Fuentes' return to Twitter. Drag the bad ideas into the open, but then do something about it when they're there. Show everybody, defeat them in the open marketplace of ideas. Let the best ideas win. We don't have to be afraid of the bad ideas. We have the truth on our side. We have God on our side. And now as a result of this, I'm being smeared and dragged through the mud. I honestly think they're trying to make an example out of me. I think one of the reasons why a lot of people aren't willing to stand up to this stuff is because if you do, it's gained so much momentum now, and it has so many powerful voices in that corner, including Tucker, who I'm not afraid to call out by name. He certainly uses my name a lot to smear me. Calls me a betrayer, a traitor, questions my Christianity. He said recently that I revel in the death of children because I support Israel. It's like I want children in Gaza to die. He just says that. I don't claim to know what his motives are. I don't claim to know what's going on in his heart. I know what he does and what he says, and I'm willing to criticize it. But I'm not trying to read into his motives like that. I don't appreciate that. But now it's resulted in I'm getting death threats. Someone was just arrested in Texas for threatening to kill me and my family. And I think they're trying to make an example out of me. They're trying to intimidate me into silence. It's not working with me, and I hope it doesn't work with you. I'll close with an illustration. I think that, bad ideas do spread like mind viruses. That's a great way of characterizing them. I love Elon's characterization. But they're not the only thing that spreads. There was a study that was done, I believe it was in the 50s, called the Ash experiments. It was a social conformity study that was intended to gauge the extent to which ordinary people would conform with what everyone else was saying just because everyone else was saying it. It was really interesting the way they set it up. They basically had tables like this, tables of like 10 people, and they would give them 2 cards. In one hand, you had a card with 3 different length lines on it, a short line, a medium line, and a longer line. And then in the other hand, you had a card with a matching line. It matched one of these 3, and this is like the simplest problem ever. Preschoolers can do this. It's either A, B, or C that matches. And they instructed everybody, there was one person who's the subject and everyone else was in on it, and they instructed everybody to give the wrong answer. So the answer was clearly A, and they instructed everybody to say B. So it went B, 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 all the way around the table. Everyone would say their answer, and it got around to the last person who's the subject of the study, and they must have been questioning their own sanity. Their eyesight, their sanity, they're like, why did everyone say B? It's clearly A. Well, they ran several rounds of this, and by the end of it, 70% of the people had conformed with everyone else and said B. Against their own judgment, they sided with everyone else. By the way, no penalty for getting it wrong. It's not like our current culture where if you're out of step with whatever the politically correct thing is, there's some kind of penalty, like in our case, getting kicked off of Twitter. No penalty, just social pressure. But the fascinating thing was when they introduced a variable and they had one person at the table give the correct answer. So it went B, 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 A, B, 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 and then it came around to the subject of the study. And in that case, the conformity rate dropped to under 5%. It went from most people conforming to almost no one conforming just because one person was willing to say what was true. It was like it gave permission. And so that is my call to action to you guys, is to have not just moral clarity, but the courage to do something with it. The two of them have to be coupled together, and courage, like a good infection, will spread. Thank you.
Before we wrap up, I want to share something important with you. The entire anti-Israel movement is built on one central accusation, that in 1948 Israel stole the land, and ever since Palestinians have simply been resisting. But what if everything we've been told about this story is untrue? What if the real history of 1948 shows not Arabs being forced out, but Jews, while seeking peace, having to fight for their survival against a genocidal enemy that willed its destruction long before Israel's re-establishment? Have a watch of the trailer for our new, groundbreaking and essential documentary entitled What Really Happened in 1948. And if you want to see the full film, just click the link in the video description. In 1948, the world witnessed the rebirth of the Jewish state, the State of Israel. A moment celebrated as a miracle of survival and self-determination after centuries of persecution and the horrors of the Holocaust. Yet for decades, this event has been twisted into a narrative of theft and catastrophe, with the so-called Nakba portrayed as Israel's original sin, where Jews allegedly stole Arab land and displaced innocents in a premeditated act of ethnic cleansing. But what if this story is fundamentally inverted? What if the cause and effect are the other way around? Not Israel aggressively seizing territory and Arabs responding in self-defense, but Arabs, driven by deep-seated hatred, rejecting the Jews' legal and historical rights to live in their ancestral homeland and waging a genocidal war long before Israel's re-establishment. In this JTV Plus documentary, we're going to uncover the unvarnished truth about 1948, the centuries of pogroms and anti-Semitic violence that set the stage, the Arab leaders' explicit calls for extermination, and the defensive war Israel fought to secure its existence. We'll challenge the pervasive lies head-on, showing how Arab rejection of peace wasn't about creating a Palestinian state, but about denying Jews the right to live at all. From the Nazi-allied leader of the Arabs in Palestine, the Mufti al-Husseini, to the forgotten occupations by Jordan and Egypt, where no Palestinian state was even considered, this is the story of a conflict rooted not in displacement, but in whether the Jews deserve to live in their homeland. Join us as we debunk the myths with facts, confront the historical record fairly but firmly, and reveal why 1948 was not an act of aggression, but a righteous response to annihilation. This is what really happened in 1948. To watch this JTV Plus documentary and access much more premium content, click on the link in the video description.